Four countries, one question. Why does one country look at poverty as ancient history, while three others are still drowning in it? Singapore, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. All four have been growing their economies for 20 years. All four have rising GDPs. All four have governments that say they are fighting poverty. But walk the street of each and you'll feel something completely different. Today we're going to compare these four countries on poverty, inequality, and economic growth. And I'm going to show you one number, just one, that explains almost everything. That number is called the Gini coefficient. Stay with me. I'm going to break it down so simply that you never forget. So what is the Gini coefficient? Forget the textbook. Here is all you need to know. Imagine 10 people sitting at a dinner table. There is one big pot of food to share. If everyone gets exactly the same portion, that is a Gini of 0, perfect equality. Now imagine one person at that table grabs almost everything, 8 portions for themselves, and the other 9 people are sharing the scraps. That is a Gini close to 100, total inequality. Every country in the world falls somewhere between 0 and 100. 0 to 25, very equal. Think Norway, Denmark, and Finland. 25 to 35, moderate. Most of Europe sits here. 35 to 45, high inequality. This is where Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania live. Above 45, extreme. South Africa, Brazil, the worst in the world. Now here is a critical thing to understand. The Gini does not measure poverty. It measures the gap between the rich and everyone else. You can have a country where the economy is growing, GDP going up, new buildings going up, new roads. But if the Gini is high or getting worse, that growth is not reaching ordinary people. It is pulling at the top. That is the story of East Africa, and it is exactly opposite of what happens in Singapore. Let me show you. So chapter 1, let's start with Singapore. Let us start with Singapore because Singapore is the lesson. In 1965, Singapore was a third world fishing village. No natural resources, tiny land, high unemployment. They were actually expelled from Malaysia and left to survive alone. Today, GDP per capita of 97,000. The fourth richest country in the world per person. Unemployment at just 1.8%. No official poverty line because extreme poverty has essentially been eliminated. But here is what most people miss about Singapore. It was not just growth that saved them. It was what they did with the growth. Between 2015 and 2025, in the same decade that Kenya was getting poorer, Singapore's Gini coefficient fell from 0.409 to 0.359, meaning the gap between the rich and the poor was actively closing. Lower income households saw higher income growth than wealthy ones. The government was deliberately pulling people up from the bottom. How? Investment in public housing, universal health, quality public education, strong labor protections, and a government that saw inequality itself as a national security threat. Singapore did not just grow, it redistributed. That is the difference. Now let us come home to Kenya. Kenya is the biggest economy in East Africa, in East and Central Africa, 121 billion GDP. Nairobi is called the Silicon Savannah. M-Pesa changed how the world thinks about mobile money. And yet, 39.8% of Kenyans live below the national poverty line. That is about 20 million people. Here is the part that should make every Kenyan uncomfortable. Between 2005 and 2015, Kenya was actually winning. The poverty rate fell from 46.8% to 36.1%. The Gini was improving, meaning the gap was closing. Rural Kenyans were being lifted out of poverty. Then after 2015, everything reversed. 7 million more Kenyans fell into extreme poverty, a 37% increase, and this happened while the economy kept growing. How? because the growth stopped reaching ordinary people. The richest 125 Kenyans now hold more wealth than 77% of the population. 42 million people. Average top company CEO earns 214 times more than a teacher. Real consumption, what people buy and eat, fell by 34% in urban areas between 2015 and 2022. Food prices went up 50% since 2020. The average worker is 11% poorer in real terms. Kenya's economy got bigger, Kenya's people got poorer. That is not a growth problem. That is a distribution problem. That is what the Gini tells you. Let's go to Uganda. Uganda, the pearl of Africa. On paper, Uganda has actually done better than Kenya on national poverty rate. It sits at around 20%, lower than Kenya's 39.8%. And Uganda has been growing at 6% GDP growth in 2025. But do not be fooled by that headline number. Uganda's GDP per capita is just 1,340, amongst the lowest in the world, 160th out of 195 countries, and 71% of the economy depends on agriculture. Much of it subsistent, meaning people are growing food just to eat themselves, not to build wealth. The Gini tells a more complex story. Uganda's inequality score sits at 42.8, high, and the regional picture is deeply uneven. While poverty fell nationally since the 1990s, Eastern Uganda actually got poorer over the same period. The capital gets richer, the regions get left behind. And Uganda faces the same structural problem as Kenya. Growth that does not employ enough people. A child born today in Uganda will grow up to only 38% as productive as their potential. Because under investment in education and health, that gap in human capital is the invisible hand keeping people poor. Uganda also has oil, 1.4 billion recoverable barrels. The question is whether that oil wealth will follow the Singapore model, invested back into the people, or the typical African resource curse, where it concentrates at the top and the Gini gets worse. That is a real test coming for Uganda. Now, Tanzania. Tanzania, quietly consistent, quietly struggling. Tanzania has maintained roughly 6% GDP for almost 2 decades. That is impressive by any standard. Dar es Salaam is growing fast. The country is stable. There is a genuine momentum. But here is the problem. 40% of Tanzania, around 26.8 million people, still live in extreme poverty on less than $2 a day. And Tanzania's poverty story has 3 chapters that should sound very familiar. First chapter, growth with rising inequality. The economy grew, but the Gini got worse. Second chapter, inclusive growth. Both poverty and inequality fell. Things were working. Third chapter, since 2012, stagnating poverty, reduction with rising inequality again. Sounds familiar? It is almost the same pattern as Kenya. Growth that stopped being inclusive. Benefits that started concentrating at the top. A Gini that stopped improving. Tanzania's Gini sits at 40.5, not as bad as Kenya or Uganda, but heading in the wrong direction. The fundamental challenge for Tanzania is the same one facing all of East Africa. You can grow an economy, but unless that growth is deliberately directed at the bottom through wages, public services, land rights, and social protection, the Gini will tell you the truth. And right now, Tanzania's Gini is saying growth is happening, but not for everyone. Let us put all 4 countries side by side. Here is the single most important sentence from this entire video. Economic growth is not the same as poverty reduction. Growth tells you the size of the pot. The Gini tells you who is eating from it. Singapore understood this from day one. East Africa is still learning, or more precisely, the government of East Africa have not been forced to act on it. The resources exist, the question is always political will. So what is the call to action? The Gini coefficient is just a number, but it is an honest number. In a world full of politicians telling you the economy is growing, the Gini quietly tells you whether that growth is reaching you or not. Singapore proved it is possible to grow fast and reduce inequality at the same time. East Africa has the growth, the population, and the potential to do the same thing. The question I want you to sit with you, whose job is it to make that happen? Government, private sector, civil society, you. Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think. If this video helped you understand something you didn't understand before, share it. That is how this channel grows. Subscribe for weekly analysis on African economies, data, and development. This is Early Edition. See you next week.